So we saw the Bank of Canada's increase in interest rates today. And what I want to highlight is the impact that's having on people. Right now, there are so many Canadians across this country looking at their mortgages thinking, with this increase, will I be able to afford to keep my home? Will I be able to pay my bills? That's a real risk and a real fear. And that's why we're impressing upon the government the need to have a plan to deal with the inflation that doesn't rest solely on the shoulders of the Bank of Canada, but also a plan to put in place supports for Canadians that are going to feel the crush of the combination of the increased cost of living and increased interest rates. And finally, if increased interest rates continue, and as economists predict that there will be a recession, we need a plan in place to protect workers. So these are things that we're calling for, and we'll be asking questions on this in the House today. Donc, avec l'annonce de la Banque du Canada, qui a augmenté les taux d'intérêt, on veut encore souligner comment l'augmentation des taux d'intérêt a un impact sur les familles. Et à ce moment, plusieurs Canadiens et Canadiennes à travers le pays réfléchissent et pensent s'ils vont avoir la capacité de payer leurs factures. C'est vraiment une peur pour plusieurs Canadiens. Et donc, on exige du gouvernement de faire deux choses. Premièrement, on a besoin d'un plan pour aider les familles dans un temps où on a une inflation et un taux d'intérêt qui continue d'augmenter. Donc, on a besoin d'un plan pour aider les familles et les travailleurs. Deuxièmement, si, comme les économistes précisent qu'on va avoir une récession, on a besoin d'un plan pour protéger les travailleurs. On va continuer à mettre la pression sur le gouvernement pour encore mettre l'emphase sur le fait que le gouvernement a un rôle à jouer pour faire face à l'inflation. Et ce n'est pas seulement la responsabilité du Banque du Canada. Le gouvernement du Canada, les libéraux ont un rôle à s'assurer que les gens ont des protections nécessaires pour l'avenir. Merci. Thank you. With that, I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Well, you said you want a plan in place. You have an agreement with the Liberals. What are you trying to use? How are you trying to use that agreement in any way to influence what that plan says?
Yeah, so we've laid out a couple of things that we want to see. First of all, a reform to EI. If there's going to be a recession, that means Canadians will lose their jobs. And right now, the current EI only covers 40% of Canadians. In the face of what might be hundreds of thousands of Canadians losing their jobs in what economists are predicting as a recession, we need a plan to make sure all Canadians are protected with EI. We've also said to help out people with the cost of energy and other costs, that we need to put in place a windfall tax like Europe, like the European Union, like Spain, and like the United Kingdom have done, and use the excess profits of these wealthy corporations to reinvest in ways to help people out and support people in this time. So we've laid out a number of things that we're calling for, but we want to make it really clear that the increase in interest rates are going to mean a very serious impact on Canadians, and we need to see a plan that includes some of the elements that we've said to address these problems.
What are your thoughts on the timeline TIFNAC was looking out this morning, saying he expects to see interest rates hovering around the 7% mark for the final quarter of 2022, down to about 3% by the end of 2023, and hitting that 2% target once again in 2024?
Well, what our concern is, when we look at the mechanism used by the Bank of Canada to increase interest rates, we know that that's had an impact on housing, for example. Hasn't made it affordable, but we're seeing housing costs come down somewhat. But increasing interest rates has no direct correlation with the cost of food or the cost of gasoline. All additional elements of inflation, when we look at the cost of living that's gone up, inflation has hit in a variety of ways. But how would the Bank of Canada increasing interest rates help Canadians that are struggling with the cost of food or the cost of gasoline? So we want to make it clear that it's the responsibility of the Government of Canada to also step in and provide relief and support in the face of inflation. That's why our call to look at the prices of food, and to have the Competition Bureau also now announce that they're going to be looking at the price of food. That's a concrete measure to deal with one of those inflationary pressures. We've also been saying that corporate greed is contributing to the increased cost of everything. How would interest rates impact corporate greed, which is becoming more and more clear as a contributor to the rising cost of living?
I have a question actually on, it's an unrelated matter, but
yeah.
What are your feelings on Premier Ford declining to appear at the commission inquiry?
I think it's completely wrong. The premier of this province, where one of the biggest, the convoy's impact had one of the biggest impacts on the economy, on goods flowing across the border. It meant that many people couldn't go into work because supplies weren't there and those factories were shut down. We saw the city of Ottawa under siege. Given all of that, the premier of this province absolutely should be testifying to provide full transparency in what he was doing, what he failed to do, so that we can make a good decision around, or we can make a more informed decision around the future and recommendations so that we can avoid this type of situation in the future.
And if Secretary Blinken tomorrow in his visit asks Canada to provide troops for an intervention in Haiti, what do you think Canada should answer?
This is a difficult question for Canada, given the track record of involvement in Haiti, and that Canada's involvement hasn't been the most effective in solving the problems that the people of Haiti are faced with. So I think we need to be very careful about how we provide support in a way that is in line with what the people of Haiti want, and in a way that's actually going to have the outcomes that the people of Haiti want for their country. And given the track record, I can see some serious reservations around the involvement of military in that way. Sur Haïti, oui. Donc, avec le bilan du Canada par rapport dans le passé, les étapes que le Canada a prises pour aider Haïti, le bilan n'est pas un bon bilan. Et c'est clair que dans le passé, l'ingérence du Canada n'a pas vraiment aidé le pays et en particulier les gens. Donc, ce que j'exige le gouvernement de faire, c'est de s'assurer que ce qu'on fait, les mesures qu'on prend, aident les gens, les peuples d'Haïti, et dans une manière qui appuie leur volonté, ce qu'ils veulent voir pour leur pays et pour leur peuple.
So today, the Bank of Canada slowed its pace of interest rate hikes. Today, do you think noises and criticism that you made in recent days made a difference?
I think it's a good sign that they're not moving as aggressively. We've also heard from other economists saying that maybe we should just pause, that the increased interest rates now will take some time to actually have an impact. Maybe we need to pause right now, and many economists have come out to suggest that. And what we're saying is, let's be really serious about the impact of increased interest rates. When that happens, it hurts people. It hurts people in two ways. One is that people directly are struggling with the cost of their mortgage and their debt. And the second impact is the real likelihood of a recession. And if that happens, Canadians will lose their jobs. So yes, I think it's very important for the Bank of Canada to consider the impacts on employment. I think it's important for the government of Canada to make it clear that the mandate should include employment considerations so that we don't create a recession that causes massive job loss. And ultimately, the government of Canada, the Liberal government, needs to make sure they've got a plan in place to deal with either eventuality. If it's a recession or just the increased interest rates, we need to have a plan in place that protects Canadians. Et nous, okay, oui.
La proportion des immigrants n'a jamais été aussi élevée au Canada, c'est presque le quart. C'est une gazette de Statistique Canada aujourd'hui. Malgré la pandémie, on a accueilli le grand nombre d'immigrants depuis le recensement, depuis qu'on fait les recensements de pays. Vos réactions à ces données?
Quelques réactions. Premièrement, ce qui est clair à travers le pays, j'ai parlé avec plusieurs chambres de commerce, avec plusieurs entreprises. Ce qui est clair à travers le pays, c'était le fait que pour longtemps, on avait eu une pénurie de main-d'œuvre. Donc ça, c'est un problème fort. Et une solution, c'était l'immigration. Donc je sais que c'est une solution pour régler ce problème. Mais ma deuxième réponse, c'est le fait que, en général, dans mon bureau comme député, mais dans plusieurs bureaux à travers le pays, la critique, c'est le système d'immigration ne fonctionne pas. À ce moment, on a des grands temps d'entente. C'est tellement difficile de procéder les applications. Donc, on a un grand problème avec le système d'immigration et on doit régler ça.
Can I ask just,
Yeah.
you know, a few months back, Pierre Poilievre, when he was running for Conservative leadership, was talking about the Bank of Canada, what it should or shouldn't do. And a lot of folks said it's not for politicians to opine on what the Bank of Canada should or shouldn't do. It needs to be independent. There ought not be any political interference. Your questions and your comments of late have suggested that, no, you think politicians ought to be weighing in on what the Bank of Canada should and shouldn't do. So when people come back and say there ought not be political interference, I wonder just how you reconcile those two things.
I think it's a really important question. I want to just make a distinction. Pierre Poilievre was calling for firing the governor of the Bank of Canada, which is clearly an attack on the independence of the institution. What we've been calling for is an acknowledgement that the government of Canada sets the mandate for the Bank of Canada. That is a fact. And that mandate should not be a narrow mandate that just focuses on inflation. It should also include a strong element in the mandate that looks at the impact on employment, because the sharp increase of interest rates will have a result of a recession, which will mean hundreds of thousands of jobs lost in our country. That is not a tenable situation for our country. And it can't be that the Bank of Canada's mandate is so narrow when the Government of Canada sets it. So we're calling on the Liberals to step up and not just hide behind the Bank of Canada, set a clear mandate that includes the consideration of jobs and maximum employment, and additionally recognize that many of the cost increases are not going to be dealt with just by increasing interest rates. We know that interest rate increases have had an impact on housing, for example. Haven't made it affordable, but have certainly had a downward pressure on housing prices. But when it comes to the cost of food or the cost of gasoline, neither of those two things, which are a big part of inflation, are going to be impacted directly by an increased interest rate. So in those areas, that's where the government has to step up and provide solutions. And that's why we've called for things like inquiry into the food prices, having the Competition Bureau look at whether there is a monopoly going on or whether there's price fixing going on. So those are important measures, but we want to acknowledge that the cost of living that's going up will not be dealt with just by increasing interest rates, but certainly that's going to have an impact, a negative impact on Canadians, and that's something that the Government of Canada has to respond to, and that's what we're calling out the Liberals to say, well, you need a plan in case recession happens, a plan if the cost of living continues to rise and interest rates rise. What is a plan for Canadians?
The government would argue that that plan, though, they have to be very careful lest they cause more inflation. If they keep spending on things to help address the cost for Canadians, it just, as in their words, adds fuel to the fire. So what can a plan look like without adding fuel to the fire?
Well, some of the things that we've already done have been approved by economists. So the idea of increasing the GST rebate, that's a measure that's targeted and that does not go to everyone, and in doing so, that's going to actually support people without contributing to inflation. And there's a reason why initially all parties were opposed to the idea, and then we forced everyone to support our idea, and now it's moved ahead. There's other things that we can do. When we look at a plan for a recession, we need an EI system that is actually going to be there for all Canadians. Right now, the EI system only covers 40% of Canadians. If there is a recession, 60% of people aren't covered. That's the type of investment we should be making. That's not going to contribute to inflation, but it's going to ensure that people have some support if they lose their jobs. So similarly, when we look at the single-minded approach of just increasing interest rates, that is not good enough to deal with the cost of living crisis. And there's many more things that the Government of Canada needs to do. I guess the final piece I'll leave you with is the strategy that other countries have taken with the windfall tax. The massive profits made by corporations are nearing record levels, and some have exceeded record levels. A windfall tax is a tax on their excess profit, and using that to redistribute in supports for people would be another way to provide help that doesn't contribute to inflation.
Do you think that there ought to be political accountability for the bank's failure to control inflation thus far? Should they be held accountable to some degree? Do you see it as a failure?
I see the failure actually fall on the shoulders of the government. The Liberal government, if you recall, not too long ago, just 6 months ago, continued to say when we were talking about the rising cost of living, they said it's not our fault and it's worse in other countries. Don't worry about it. That was effectively their response. I remember hearing that answer from the Prime Minister and other ministers. And now we're at a point where the Bank of Canada is engaged in a sharp increase in interest rates, which is going to hurt people. That shows to me clear evidence that the Liberal government failed to take into consideration the impact of the cost of living and take steps necessary to reduce that impact and to tackle inflation, because it can't just be the increased interest rate tool of the Bank of Canada that is the only response to inflation. There has to be additional tools and additional strategies, and that's what we're calling for.
Merci, thank you.
Merci, thank you so much.